All right, let's talk about the work of Thomas Sargent, a guy who totally rewired our thinking on economic policy, inflation, and, believe it or not, the power of belief itself. His work all spun around this one huge question that had economists scratching their heads for decades. So, for a huge chunk of the 20th century, this was the big question in macroeconomics. Can a government with some smart policies actually smooth out the crazy ups and downs of the economy? It sounds simple, but the answer? Well, that turned out to be anything but. Because by the 1970s, it really looked like the answer was a hard no. The whole economic machine just seemed broken. You had runaway inflation, and it felt like every single lever policymakers were pulling was just making things worse. The old playbooks just weren't working, and nobody could figure out why. To get to the bottom of this, we first have to look at a really specific mystery that caught Thomas Sargent's attention. I'm talking about the puzzle of hyperinflation, and more specifically, why these raging economic fires didn't just slowly burn out, but instead they seemed to stop cold, like overnight. So Sargent goes and looks at the history books, right? He digs into the data from those massive European hyperinflations back in the 1920s, and what he finds is just, well, it's stunning. These economic meltdowns didn't just slowly get better, it was more like one day prices were shooting for the moon, and literally the next day they were stable. It was like someone just flipped a switch, but how is that even possible? And here's the thing, figuring that out wasn't about finding some new policy gadget or trick. No, it was about a massive break from old ways of thinking, a whole new way of looking at the most important players in the economic game, us. And this brings us right to the heart of Sargent's whole revolution, a completely new way of understanding what people expect to happen in the future. Okay, this slide really gets to the core of the change. The old way of thinking basically saw people as driving while only looking in the rearview mirror. They'd see past inflation and slowly, kind of clumsily, adjust. But Sargent came along and said, hang on a second, people are smart. They look ahead. They read the news, they watch what politicians are doing, and they actively try to guess the government's next move. The economy isn't some machine you can just tune. It's a strategic game, like chess. This big idea got a name, rational expectations. Now, that doesn't mean people have a crystal ball or that they're always right. Not at all. It just means they don't make the same dumb mistakes over and over again. They learn, they adapt, and they use every piece of information they can get their hands on to look out for themselves. So, if people are forward-looking and trying to anticipate your every move, well, that changes everything. And that insight led Sargent to his next massive idea. It's not about the individual moves a government makes. It's about the entire set of rules they're playing by. And this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If the public sees your policy coming from a mile away and changes what they're doing before you even do it, how can you ever create a positive change? How could you, say, boost employment if everyone already saw it coming? It feels like you're constantly playing catch-up. Sargent's answer here was brilliant. He basically split things into two buckets, a single policy action versus a whole policy regime, a single promise, a one-off action. It's like telling your friends you're going to eat a salad for lunch today. Yeah, okay, maybe you will, maybe you won't. It's easy to doubt. But a regime change? That's like totally changing your lifestyle. You get a new diet plan, a gym membership, a personal trainer. It signals a serious, credible, and permanent shift. And that is the key insight. Looking at a single interest rate hike without understanding the central bank's entire strategy, it's like watching one play in a football game and trying to predict the final score. It doesn't work. The regime, the whole system of rules and goals, is what really matters, because that's what shapes what people expect. Okay, so now we've got all the pieces on the board. We've got forward-looking people, and we've got this idea of a policy regime. So let's put them all together and finally solve that hyperinflation puzzle. So this is the playbook Sargent uncovered. The countries that actually managed to stop these insane hyperinflations didn't just tweak a few interest rates. No way. They performed like radical surgery on their government institutions. They created brand new central banks, they passed super strict budget laws, and they totally changed the rules of the game for money and debt. It was a clean, decisive break from the past. And right there, that's the master key, credibility. It wasn't just about writing down new rules. It was about making the public believe, truly believe, that the government was going to stick to them no matter what. Once that belief clicked into place, people's expectations didn't just slowly adjust, they snapped into a new reality almost overnight. And just like that, the inflation stopped.
not because of a slow policy change, but because of a lightning-fast change in what everyone believed would happen next.
And this idea, it wasn't just a cool way to explain a few historical events. It became a cornerstone, a foundation of how pretty much all macroeconomic policy is understood today. And for completely transforming the field of economics, Thomas Sargent, along with Christopher Sims, was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2011. His work gave us the tools to understand just how powerful expectations and credible policy shifts really are. So, what's the bottom line from Sargent's big revolution? Well, first, that expectations aren't just some little footnote, they are the main event in the economy. Second, that we should stop obsessing over single moves and look at the whole system, the whole regime. But maybe most importantly, he taught us that a government's most precious asset isn't its gold reserves or its ability to tax, it's its credibility. And that leaves us with a huge question for today, doesn't it? In our world of deep political divisions, crazy fast technological change, and constant global shocks, how can policymakers actually build and then maintain the kind of credibility that Sargent proved is so unbelievably critical? What do you think?